Hi and welcome to Magic Numbers. This is episode number 84, and today I'm going to be talking about signals in draft and how to read them, what are they, and what information you can get. But before we go to that, I'd like to thank my sponsors. First of all, it's you, the patrons, the very select few that are supporting my work. And for supporting my work, you get extra benefits, which you can check on my Patreon, which should be in the links of my podcast / YouTube channel / Twitch. But I highly encourage you to do so. I'm planning to set some goals. I think if I move on to have like 250 a month, I will do additional videos of gameplay that will not be as a podcast, but as a YouTube thing. So it's worth supporting me so I can get finally the motivation to sit down and record those. And apart from that, I'm also sponsored by mtgazone.com, who give me a space to write the articles. I'm sure that this one is going to be written down and submitted so you can actually read it at some stage in a shorter form, but maybe with less detail than the podcast is. And with that, we can move on to the actual seminar. As always, I will start with a preamble. And this week, my preamble is signal is a meaningless term without a good definition. And we hear so many conversations about signals in draft, but I basically never saw a good description of what a signal is. And it's very difficult to debate a topic when there's no, it's very easy to debate a topic when there is no good definition, because everyone can make their own definition, defend it, and then in the end, you talk about 4 different things and you don't come to any kind of reasonable conclusion. So at least a part of this episode will be looking at what a signal is, how you can use data to interpret if something is a signal or not. And I'm going to give strict definitions of the signal. Obviously, these are arbitrary and these are made completely by me, so I'm very much tilting the table towards my definition of it. But hey, this is the advantage of making a data-related content. I can make those definitions because I actually have data to support them, so I'm going to use them. And right. But generally, without a good definition of what a signal is, all talk about signals is running into the same problem. It's meaningless because what are we talking even about? What is this mythical signal? And I can hear that already in the pre-episode chat in my chat, that basically some people think that a single card will be a signal. Some people will see that the color volume passing through you will be a signal. And then it's hard to debate it when there are so diverse views on what does the thing actually mean. So I think that signals is not the only topic that has that problem in Magic. There are a couple of others, and it's good to sit down and maybe think about how we define those things and what do we look for in the terms that have been used in a sort of traditional way. And this is a part of the also like switch from Magic as a content as a sort of rough debate, like very much you can compare it to science before the scientific times, when there were a bunch of people that knew something about things and they were talking and they were disagreeing, but basically they lacked common ground. And then came the modern science methodology, and now at least we still have different nomenclatures and different topics, but at least you can refer to a work of someone that defines something, and then you can agree with the person that, look, we're talking about this thing. This is what I mean. I quoted it here, and now we can discuss it with knowledge of what we're discussing, and not just trying to go into the who screams loudest about their idea of the thing and not reach any kind of solid conclusions. Right. I told you that I do have patrons, and I do try to fulfill my patron duties, and one of them is answering questions. And this week's question comes from Mercuria Blue, and I freely quote the question, but it was, is Elven Chorus that bad? Of course, he refers to the card Elven Chorus, 3 and a green enchantment. You may look at the top card of your library at any time, and you may cast creature spells from the top of your library. Creatures you control have tapped to add 1 mana of any color. And this card has pretty bad stats, and I guess that the question that Mercurio is asking is this card really bad, or is it just badly played? Um, and I think that the data suggests that yes, it is that bad. At least in this format. I don't like to say that the card is universally bad, and I can imagine formats where this card would have been amazing. Like put it in any kind of old school Magic limited format when there is not billions of 2-for-1s, and I'm pretty sure Elven Chorus is going to be an amazing card. But in this particular format, it just looks slightly underwhelming, and I will try to make a case for that. Obviously, I'm not just going to say that the card is bad and that's the end of it. Come on, you know me better, hopefully. So first of all, I looked at the win rate. And I looked at the win rate of the 3-player win rate tiers that 17 Lads has on their website. And basically, Elven Chorus is below the average for the win rate of green decks. It's way below the average win rate for all decks in every tier that we look at. So there's 42.7% win rate in the bottom tier, where green decks have 45.3% win rate, and all decks have 48.7% win rate, the 2-color decks at least. So it's like 6 percentage points below the average for all decks, and it's still like almost 3 percentage points below the green decks. So it's not even good in the decks where it technically should be. Same with mid tier, there we have 51% win rate, but green decks have 53% win rate, and all decks have 57. So again, 6 percentage points below average deck, and 2 percentage points below a green deck. And in top tier, it's 53.2% win rate, when green decks have 57.4, and all decks have 60.5. So again, 4 percentage points lower than green decks. That's even a bigger difference than previously, and 7 percentage points lower than an average deck. So at least from this perspective, it's a bad card. And also, there is one card that I would like to compare it with, and that's Legolas Master Archer. Because in the bottom tier of players, Legolas Master Archer has a lower win rate than Elven Chorus. Legolas Master Archer, 1 green, legendary creature, elf archer. It has reach. Whenever you cast a spell that targets it, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And whenever you cast a spell that targets a creature you don't control, Legolas deals damage equal to its power to up to 1 target creature. So basically, this card in the hands of the bottom tier players, so we usually will consider these are the beginners in drafting that want to improve, therefore they start at 17 lands. Legolas does worse. But you go to the mid tier and the top tier, and all of a sudden, so in the bottom tier, Legolas has 39.5% win rate and 42.7% for Elven Chorus. When you go to the mid tier, Elven Chorus has 51%, and Legolas has 59.4% win rate. So huge difference in favor of Legolas. And in top tier players, 53.2% for Elven Chorus and 58.6% for Legolas. So weirdly, mid-tier players do better with Legolas for some reason. It would be interesting to see why they do particularly better with Legolas. But also top tiers do much better with Legolas, while the bottom tier players do better with Elven Chorus. And this for me is like a big signal that this is actually a card that is just bad. If the best players on the site cannot make that card win, but they definitely can do it with Legolas, it means that Legolas is not a super good card, but at least it has potential to be abused and to do something interesting in the game. While Elven Chorus, even top players cannot make it work. Therefore, probably that card just aligns badly with the format, and you should avoid it, basically. And, you can send me all the amount of screenshots when it was good, and I will believe them, because the card will for sure be good at some stages. The problem is that probably in most of those situations, it's going to be a sort of win more card. But not a card that will, win games on its own. Especially that you need a broad board to use the mana giving ability. There is plenty of stuff that will not necessarily be able to be cast with Elven Chorus in this format. There's plenty of creatures that are not creatures, so you have to avoid them in your deck, and some of those cards are really good, so you have to avoid playing good cards in order to accommodate Elven Chorus, and generally that's not the ones you want to do. Yeah. So long story short, Elven Chorus, pretty bad according to the data. And before we move to the main topic, I just wanted to very, very briefly talk about the metagame evolution. This is the archetype win rates from last week, just to give you an impression of what's going on in the format. Because it's very easy to get stuck in the idea that Rakdos is the best deck because it was the best deck in week 1, and then there is nothing, and then there are some other decks. But actually, the gap between Rakdos and Izzet is closing down pretty quickly, and I'm pretty sure if we looked at the top players, it would have been completely bridged. Currently, Rakdos is still the highest win rate archetype in the last week. It has 57.6 win rate, but that's markedly lower than in the first days of the format when it was around 60%. These are through last week from Wunderfunk. So that's like from yesterday until a week ago. So basically from week ago until yesterday, sort of. So Rakdos has 57.6, Izzet 57%, and these two are super close right now. That close enough that they are basically in the same tier. And then you have a drop of like 1 percentage point roughly at 56, and you have Orzhov, Boros, and Dimir, which are more or less even. And then you have a slight drop off of Golgari. Just to give you a bit more context, I look at the win rates of Rakdos decks and Rakdos with splash decks. And it so happens that Golgari has much bigger fraction of the splash decks, and splash decks are doing much worse in this format, and that's why the win rate of Golgari is slightly lower. I think pure Golgari is on par with Orzhov, Boros, and Dimir. And then you have a bigger drop off, and Gruul has like 54.5%, Selesnya 53%, Azorius 52%, and Simic 50%. So these are markedly worse. But I think that the first 6 archetypes, so Rakdos, Izzet, Orzhov, Boros, Dimir, and Golgari, are doing pretty well. Still with Rakdos being on top, but not as dominant as it was in the beginning, and Izzet really gaining on it. I wouldn't be surprised that by the end of the format, Izzet's going to have actually a slightly higher win rate. So now we can finally, after some time, move on to the main topic of signals in draft. But first, what is a signal? And I took some definitions from actually science, nothing to do with magic, but I thought it would be good to look at the definitions of what a signal is before we start trying to define what a signal is in magic. And one definition I found is function that conveys information about a phenomenon. And the other definition that I found was actions done by an organism to alert other organisms. And I think that both of those things fit quite decently into the Magic the Gathering draft framework. Like definitely actions done by an organism to alert other organisms, that's like a perfect definition of magic signals. It's actions done by an organism, and they are not necessarily actions that are intended to give signals, but still are giving a signal to other organisms, even if they don't want them to have that signal sent. And function that conveys information about a phenomenon, that's also like applicable to draft. You convey information about what's going on in a draft, and very much it depends on the ability to interpret that information by the person on the pod to get something useful out of that. So what is a draft signal then? I defined it as sort of mix of willingly and unwillingly sent information based on those previous definitions. Unwillingly and willingly, because I think that most of the signals I'm sending, if I'm sending that I'm not in white, I'm happy to send that signal. I want people to know that I'm not in white and that white is open so that they pick white and stay away from my colors. Unwillingly, because sometimes I will open like 4 good black cards in a pack and I still pick the best of them because they're good, but I'm sending those 3 other black cards, and that's a signal for someone that maybe black is open because they sell 3 good cards, and I really don't like to send that signal, but sometimes you just have to. So very much unwillingly sometimes have to send mixed signals and that people will interpret as signals but are not, and I don't want it. And sometimes you say that, oh, I would like to take everything in that pack because the cards are good. But most of the time, I would like to take everything in that pack so I don't send the bloody signal that black is open when I'm drafting black. And I really hate those situations when I'm being put in those, uh, because it's still a rational thing to take the black card if it's the best one, but you know that you're sending some signal, and you can hope that the people at the table will not read it, but most of the time they read it, and exactly they read it when they shouldn't be. Signal is also in the eye of beholder, so it's based on intuition and perception of the recipient. If you draft with a beginner player who doesn't still feel comfortable about pot drafting, they very often completely will ignore any kind of signals that you send. They will just pick cards. They'll maybe pick their favorite color combination or something like that, and signals don't play a role. So even though you send them, they don't mean anything because the recipient is not receptive towards them. But of course, there is another trap when you start drafting and you are getting better at it, and then you want to treat everything as a signal, and then you again read to things that you see way too much than you should. And the truth is that you should think carefully about what is a signal and when to look at it with attention and when to just ignore it as a potential, coincidence. Signals are ambiguous because, again, you never will know if you see those 3 good black cards and pick one. Are those 3 good black cards there because black is open, or are those 3 black cards there because there was a busted rare that was taken? So there will always be noise, and I think that when you talk about signal in science, you will always associate it with noise, and I think that drafts are pretty noisy in that way. And by noisy, I don't mean people scream that what is that still doing in my pack. By noise, I mean things that look like a signal but are not signal and that are confusing. And the art of understanding and navigating a draft is to filter out the noise and focus on the actual signal. And we're going to try to figure out how to do it and what are the best strategies to do it. I think more importantly, that's something that maybe escapes people, or at least maybe not everyone. I don't want to hear from the chat who knows that, but signals can be based on presence and absence. And the presence signals are the easiest ones to read. Or you see that, and again, you look at it and say, oh, what is that still doing in the pack? Because that card shouldn't be there according to your perception, and you're screaming out that thing because you were appalled by the fact that something is still in the pack. But signals based on absence are quite important. I think that the most important signal based on absence is if you get past pack 2 and the rare is missing, that's a strong signal for you that someone picked a rare. That doesn't tell you anything about what they're drafting, but also that explains if there are good uncommons in the pack. They are there because someone picked a rare, whether for rare drafting or because it was a busted rare. You don't have any information what they're drafting, but you just have to disregard everything that you see in this pack as a signal because they picked a rare, and that can be, just rares are strong sometimes. Then there are other absence-based signals we're going to talk about in the seminar. And also, I think that the last part, and that's very specific, that's a very important part, is that signals, they have range, strength, and specificity. And I'm going to dedicate a bit of the presentation to talking about range, strength, and specificity of the signals and what do those things mean to me. Okay, but that's like my very loose definition of a signal. This is the kind of perfect science definition. When you read it, it doesn't tell you anything, and you need to write a book about it and sell it in order to explain what you meant by those things. I'm not planning to write a book about signals. I'm planning to write a 4,000 word article for mtgazone.com, maybe. And then I'm not going to sell it. It's going to be freely available. So yeah, I'm not going to capitalize on my definition of coining. Okay, so before we move into the actual signals, I think that it's very important to talk about ALSA, because everyone that listens to my podcast regularly knows that I talk about ALSA. But I think that alpha is very often just shown as a number, and because it's shown as a number, it is sort of hard to imagine what does it encompass, the alpha. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of alpha visualized in slightly more detail, so you can actually think about alpha maybe in a different way next time you see the number. Alpha is the average last seen as metric from 17lands.com. It tells us how late cards go. So if something has alpha of 1, this card will be always first picked. You never see it in any other pack than the one that you open, because no one will pass you that card. Obviously, there are very few cards that fulfill that criterion, because once, twice, someone will pass a card. Usually, it's incorrect. But generally, this is to just make you understand. If the alpha is like close to 7, on average, you will see it as a 7th pick. But that, of course, means that sometimes you will only see it when you open it, and sometimes it will wheel. Cards with alpha of 7, they will wheel quite frequently, actually. So if you see the alpha 7, you must think, oh, that card will probably wheel like 60%, 70% of the time if you open it. It's one of the only universal metrics on 17lands.com, which makes it very interesting, because the problem of 17lands data very frequently is that it's based on this self-selected group of people, of 17lands users, and they are not the same as the general arena population, because they are usually more invested players, maybe even, I'm not afraid of using the word, better players with higher win rate, because their win rate is like 56, 57% on average. That's quite a lot when you play a ranked format. But alpha is based on all the players, because it takes into account the non-17lands user as they pick the cards. So this is one of the few glimpses that 17lands data can offer you into what is the average arena player doing. Because it will have like a bunch of those bronze, silver, gold players that 17lands don't have many of. It will, look at the whole cohort. So this is like a proper average, like the win rates on 17lands. You always see, oh, that has a win rate of 54. The card is rubbish. While in fact, probably in arena standards, when you take the whole population, 54% win rate for a card is going to be pretty good. It's going to be like a B level kind of uncommon. But of course, because the average of 17lands is 56, 54 doesn't look impressive. You need to go to 60% to be impressed by a card. One thing that I also realized about alpha, it's always pain to explain what it is, and that's why I'm going to dedicate a bit just to visualize it, because maybe visualization is better than explaining it in words. So here is the alpha visualization of the King of the Oathbreakers, the 2 white-black legendary creature, Spirit Noble, flying. Whenever King of the Oathbreakers or another spirit you control becomes the target of a spell, I just realized I should have picked the less worthy card, it phases out. Whenever the King of the Oathbreakers or another spirit you control phases in, create a tapped 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. And it's a 3/3. So 3/3 flyer for 4, it's a rare. It's unkillable by removal because it phases out when you try to target it, and then when it comes back from the phase out, it's making a 1/1. A decent card. I see the chat says overrated. I mean, yeah, it's not as bomby as people think. There are a million ways of dealing with it without targeting it. That's the thing that you want to be. But when I looked at the data from the roughly, 10,000 something drafts, and I looked at how the card is seen in pack 1, you can see that it was seen when you opened it in 142 packs, and this is our baseline. That means that rares in that data set were around the 142 occurrence of each rare that you open in pack 1. In pack 2, you only see it 41 times. So you have a drop from 142 to 41. This means that roughly, what would be like 30 something percent of the time, it only gets past 30 something percent of the time when people open it. So it's being first picked quite a lot, like 70% of the time it's being first picked. And then as a pick 3, you only see it 9 times. So if 140 is your baseline, 9 times is, it's below 10%. Like maybe 6% of the time is going to be passed further than 2 picks. And then you see it like 4 and 3 times as a pick 4 and 5. So rarely you will see it beyond those first picks. And the card is, I think, reasonably powerful to be there. I think maybe it's slightly overpicked because it's a multicolor card, but it's not for me to judge about the quality. I just want to depict that the alpha of this card is going to be not far from 1, but slightly higher. Because most of the time you only see it when you open it, but sometimes it will happen that you see it later. It's here 30%, here like 6%, here like 3%. So when you calculate basically this plus this plus this plus this plus this, and then you multiply those things and also sum them up, you will come up with the alpha. So you basically make a weighted average of those things, and that will be the alpha number, which will be probably like 1.4, 1.5. So that's how alpha 1.5 looks like. That's an alpha of a card that is very highly picked. As you can see, this card will never wheel in the first pack, at least. It will be passed much more in the later packs, and that's a thing that is very typical, that multicolor cards, they are picked quite highly in the first pack, and they go much later in packs 2 and especially pack 3. So this is to suggest that there are rewards of picking an open color, because if you are in the open color in your last pack, you will see all those multicolor cards wheeling to you because no one is interested in picking them because you're the only one that's drafting a particular color pair. So that's a very high alpha, very low alpha card. Here we have a card that has a higher alpha, Saruman the White, 5 mana, 4/4, legendary creature, avatar, wizard, ward 2, and whenever you cast your second spell each turn, amass orcs 2. And there you see, it was seen 390 times when people opened it. So around 390 is the par for the uncommons being opened in that data set. And you see it something like 353 times as a pick 2, which means that, roughly, because there is probably 5% margin between those values of how often you open them, but roughly 90% of the time it's going to get passed to you when someone opened it. So this already tells you something about signals. Like if you see pack 1, pick 2, Saruman the White, you see it and you should probably say, yeah, well, that's about what I would expect from this card. 90% of the time it's being passed when people open it in pack 1. So I shouldn't be really like putting any weight on that. It's not like a signal that is in any way meaningful, because 90% of the time this would happen. 10% it doesn't happen. I don't know about it because I will never see that pack unless I'm peeking what my neighbor is doing when you draft on paper. But you don't know about those disappearing Sarumans because there's just so few of them. So actually seeing it as a pick 2 is not informative at all. Now, if we go to pick 3, you see from 390 it becomes 214. So roughly half of those Sarumans disappear. So half of the Sarumans will be picked in picks 1 and 2 when you draft black on average. This means that as a pick 2, it's going to be picked quite a lot because it rarely gets picked as a pick 1. So most of it must be in pick 2. And then pick 4, you already only see 129. So you drop down to roughly 30% of the time. So 70% of Sarumans are picked by that stage. And then 75% are picked by pick 5. And it goes down, like it will wheel like 14 times out of 400. So, like 4% of the time it will wheel in pack 1. So these are probably, like if you see it wheel, this is the moment when we say, wow, Saruman wheeled. That's something that doesn't happen very frequently. So I should probably assume that blue is not heavily drafted on that pod. Now, of course, there's a problem with that, because because it happens 3% of the time, it's not going to come up in many drafts for you. I mean, when you see it, you know it. But it's a strong signal, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's very useful because it will just happen so rarely. So when I'm thinking signals, I'm thinking, something that happens just frequently enough for you to be able to reliably notice it when this happens, but not so rare that I basically never see it. So there's no point of that signal because it doesn't tell me much because I will never see it. So there has to be some kind of a good balance between the occurrence of something happening has to be rare enough that you probably should draw attention to it, but not too rare because, for instance, if I see pick 3, King of the Oathbreakers, yes, it's a signal, but I mean, how often will I see that? It just happens so rarely. But Saruman is a good card for signaling because, from pick 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, it will happen that you will see Saruman, but it will not happen very frequently. So these are sort of good signals to look at it. And this will be linked with, I should have put that graph. I made a beautiful graph about how ALSA and chances of wheeling are linked, but you also I should make those graphs for different ALSAs for people to be able to access them. So you can basically check with the finger, like what is the percentage chance of ALSA cards with this particular ALSA to be seen as this particular pick. I'll prepare it for the article so you can have a tool, sort of like a very rudimentary tool that you can explore and see what percentage do you have to see the card with ALSA X on as a pick Y. Now we move to a card that is going much later, and that's Improvised Club. As you can see, this is a common, so the numbers will be different, but it's around 1,035 of them being opened in pack 1. And then you see 1,020 in pack 2. So it's it's probably never picked as a pick 1. It's never first pick. So again, seeing it as in a pack as your second pick has zero information about that card because you're going to see it. No one first picks Improvised Club. Or maybe, like 10 out of 1,000, 1% of the time you open a pack and Improvised Club is the thing that you want to pick. Then at pick 3, you still see it 955 times. So the drop is you still see 95% of them, roughly, 94 maybe. That's still quite a lot. Of course, it's, again, not a signal at all, because if something happens 95% of the time, that's not a signal. It's just like life happening. And then you go down to 80% in pick 4, 73% in pick 5, 58% in pick 6, 44% in pick 7, roughly, 34% in pick 8. So still 34%, that's quite a lot. You might already put some kind of signal vibe on it, but it's still going to happen quite relatively frequently. And then when Improvised Club wheels, there we have a sort of information, because that will happen only 24% of the time, roughly. And because it happens 24% of the time, you say, well, 3 out of 4 times I open Improvised Club, I don't see it wheel. But this time I saw it wheel. What does it tell me about red in this pod? Probably to some extent it's open. And maybe the spells deck is particularly open, or black-red, because those decks would want Improvised Club more than any other, I guess. And then, of course, it goes down to 14, 9, 6% in later picks. So if you see like pick 11, it will happen rarely, but that obviously means that this went really far compared to where it normally is being picked for some reason. So yeah, these are the cards that will be signals, but they will only be good signals late in the draft, around the wheel time, because before that they just go quite late, so you see them and it doesn't mean that much. And then you have cards like Pippin's Bravery. Pippin's Bravery, green for an instant. You may sacrifice a food. If you do, target creature gets +4/+4 until end of turn. Otherwise, that creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. So a combat trick. And you can see that this card, throughout picks 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, it just doesn't disappear from the packs. So it never is going to be picked in, or almost never is going to be picked in those things. You see Pippin's Bravery pick 7, You look at it and say, yeah, of course I see Pippin's Bravery pick 7. Who's going to pick it before pick 7? And then it slightly drops off, but you still, like 90% of the time, you can see it pick 10. And this brings me to that. Oh, no, this doesn't bring me, because I have a special slide about it. But generally, these cards don't disappear from the packs, so they will never be like a good positive signal. Because even as pick 13, you will see it 60% of the time, roughly. So that's nothing special if you see it almost as last. So these are like maybe 4 different categories of ALSA cards, and how does the ALSA visualize for those cards. You can see them. If I flip the graphs very quickly, you can see that how those averages move up and up and up until you reach the cards that basically don't disappear from the packs for quite a long time. So that's how you should look at ALSA, and that's how you visualize the ALSA. Now, what are the parameters of the signal then? And obviously the signal will depend very much on what card do you see, what are the odds of seeing it at that stage, and how many players does the signal cover. So first I will look at the pack 1, pick 2. Pack 1, pick 2, here is the person that is passing to you. They open the pack, they pass you the pack, and you see the King of the Oathbreakers in it. If you know the numbers by heart, which you don't, but you can have like a rough guesstimate of what the ALSA of the card is. But if you know the numbers correctly, you will know that roughly 30% of the time, maybe slightly less than 30% of the time even, you will get past the King of the Oathbreakers. But that is already some sort of signal, because it happens so rarely. You know that person next to me probably is not that keen on white-black, because if they were, they would have probably picked the King of the Oathbreakers. Maybe, especially that it's pick 1, you don't know which other colors they're drafting. Maybe they pick something black, maybe they pick something white, but at least white-black potentially is open, because they would have picked it if they were interested in drafting white-black. Very good. JPSN is saying, I would check if the person took a common or uncommon. And I think that this is something that I was prepared to talk about during the slide, so thank you for reminding me. If they took a common, you can probably bet that it was either Claim the Precious or the red deal 3 damage spell, or maybe Dunlet Crebain. These are the 3 top contenders for me. What would have people picked as a pick 1 over the Oathbreakers? And 2 of those cards are black, so you have to keep that in mind. If the uncommon is missing, has a good chance it was a red card, but it could have been an Nazgul, it could have been some other things. At least what you can say is that, well, they clearly were not interested in that rare, and then you can decide, do I want to play it or do I not want to play it? That's absolutely your call, but this is the signal that you should be reading, and looking at what's missing is part of reading that signal there. The problem with the pack 1, pick 2 signal is that it only covers this one player, so it's a very small range. Remember when we were talking about the definition of the draft signal, I talked that it has range, strength, and specificity. So this signal has a very small range. It has decent specificity, because that's something that happens only 25% of the time. But yeah, it only tells you about your direct neighbor. It's nothing, there's nothing wrong with knowing what your direct neighbor is doing and not knowing what the other players are doing, because this is the person that potentially takes the strongest cards from you. So you want to definitely not be in the same color as the person sitting next to you. But because of the short range, it has limited utility for you. Now, if we look at the same thing with Saruman, if you see Saruman being passed by that person, we already talked about it a bit, that means absolutely nothing. That will happen 90% of the time. So there's absolutely no signal that Saruman will give. So pick 2, the signals are very limited. You basically only when you're past like either some kind of mythic uncommon or a good rare, these are the only times when you can actually analyze anything from the pack 1, pick 2, and it will only apply to that neighbor of yours. So pack 1, pick 2 signal can yield pretty strong information, but only tells you something about one of the players. Most cards, it won't tell you much. Most cards, it won't tell you anything at all. because those cards just don't disappear from the packs at this stage. So you will see them and you can't draw any kind of information out of that. And there we go, JPSN, so that I was not lying and reinventing things based on your suggestion. Probably the most telling info is which rarity is missing from the pack. That's the most useful signal that you can read from pack 1, pick 2. If we move a bit further to pick 1, pick 6, you can see that this already will cover a wider range. So you will know something about 5 other players when you see your card as pack 1, pick 6. So when we look at the Saruman, obviously you will not see the King of the Oathbreakers at that stage. Or, well, I mean, maybe there's like 1 in 1,000 chance that will happen, but it's not something that will happen frequently. But when you look at the Saruman at pick 6, you have 59 Sarumans versus around 60 Sarumans, and around 400 of them are being opened in every pack in that data set, which means that this will happen 15% of the time, that you will see Saruman being passed until pick 1, pick 6, pack 1, pick 6. So this is a strong signal. This is actually a stronger signal than seeing the King of the Oathbreakers in pack 2, because that will happen only 15% of the time. And that will tell you something about a bunch of players, because they all pass the Saruman. Now, probably not much about this player, because they are expected to pass Saruman, but already this player, according to the data, I mean, half of the time should pick Saruman, but they didn't. And this player, sometime, quite a lot of time, should pick the Saruman, but they didn't. And this person didn't, and this person did it. So at least for these 3 players, you have quite a strong indication that they are not interested in Saruman. And that might mean that they are not that much interested in blue. But because we have to judge on the average arena user, because Alsa is based on average arena user, and we're going to be surrounded by the average arena users. So of course, I know that Saruman is maybe not the key card for some of the best blue decks, but judging by the composition of the normal pod, you are have a good chance that Saruman would have been appreciated if the people that were passing to you were interested in blue. Well, they were not. Still, of course, there is noise. So maybe there was like a super busted rare that someone opened here, and then there was Saruman's Trickery, which is more powerful than Saruman himself. And that person picked Saruman's Trickery. Here there was like a claim the precious. Here there was some good creature, and this player was very early on white-green and picked something in white-green. And you get the Saruman, but still, I mean, here maybe there's someone drafting blue-black, here maybe there's someone drafting blue-red, here maybe they are also thinking that they're black-blue, so actually these 3 players might be quite interested in blue, but probably in most situations it's not going to be. So at least look at that signal with some kind of attention. Don't build your draft around it that you saw Saruman pick 6, but at least take it into strong consideration, because that's something that will happen rarely. And in the same situation, when you look at improvised club, it's around 60% of the time still in the pack. So if you see Saruman and improvised club in that pack, you might think, well, okay, Saruman, that's pretty neat, because that shouldn't be here already by that time, or it's not going to be common that it's going to be there at that time. But improvised club, you see, well, okay, it's could have been gone, but it's not. So maybe there is some minor information about it. But 60% of the time it's still going to be there. It just requires like a decent powered pack, and no one is going to pick improvised club before pick 8 or 9. So you can't really draw that much information from that particular card. So yeah, pick 1, pack 6 can yield pretty strong information as well, if you get the right cards. But be careful not to overinterpret it, because there might be alternative explanation why the card is still there that doesn't require all this color is fully open. And generally, my advice is that not a single one card can tell you that the color is open. That I showed in my previous seminar. something like a year ago when I was also talking about signals, where I was showing that one card is not enough to give any kind of meaningful signal. I'm going to explain how I can say that it's not giving a meaningful signal later in that presentation. It will strengthen your knowledge of the direct neighbors, because even though it covers those 5 players, the strongest information is going to be about those 3. Because, of course, this one opened the pack and there might have been a rare there. Most of the time, pack 1, pick 6, the rare is going to be gone. So quite likely that the first person picked it. And second person, there are stronger cards than for example, Saruman that you can see in pick 6, even in the same color. So they might have been picking those kind of cards. It will rarely tell you anything useful about those further seats, as I mentioned just a second ago. So then we move to pick 1, pack 9. And here you have information about the whole table. And most importantly, you know what was in the pack. And this is like the most important signal pack that you get, because you've seen what you opened, you picked your first card. If you memorized which cards were good in that thing, you can basically guess what's going to wheel. And there's a whole episode on wheeling that I did. I strongly encourage you to do it, or read the article on mtgazone.com that I wrote about wheeling, because being able to pick a card from the pack and estimate that, there's 80% chance that I'm wheeling this second card that is very well working with the first card I picked, means that you made one pick that is 2 cards. And that's a very powerful thing in draft to have. But also, something about all those players. You can guess probably 3 cards that are going to be disappearing from the pack that you opened very easily. And when you look at the Saruman, at pack 1, pick 9, you see it 14 times. So roughly 6% of the time it will happen. That's a pretty strong signal. So if you picked like Saruman's Trickery, and you send the Saruman the White around the table, and it comes back to you, you think, you know what? 8 players, 7 players said no to that Saruman. I also picked a good blue card. I will pick another Saruman. I probably also picked other blue cards, which means that people sitting directly next to me did not see many good blue cards. And I don't care if they read the signals or not. If they don't see any blue cards, whether they read the signals or not, they won't have any blue cards, because they just physically did not get the opportunity to pick them. So you might actually prepare yourself nicely for the second pack, where on the return, those players might not be interested in blue at all because you cut it off. And from the Saruman returning that in the first round already, they were not super interested. Of course, the whole maths changes if there were like super good blue cards in the pack on top of the Saruman's Trickery that you picked. So let's say there was a Glorious Gale and that one is missing. So clearly there's someone interested in blue. They were just more interested in Glorious Gale than they were in Saruman the White. So you have to keep that in mind if you shipped several good blue cards. But if you picked Trickery and the only other blue card was Saruman the White, well, that's a good signal that no one is interested in blue in that pod, or maybe few people. And if they are interested, they are more likely people that sit next to you here, just after. The people that you are going to pass to more often than they pass to you. So if they are interested in blue, you are the one that dictates what they're going to get. You might have a tricky second pack, but that's fine. But because also, so we have even stronger info, especially in those rare cases. And there will be those rare cases. There will be cards that you never expect wheeling to wheel, and these are always considered to be strong signals because they happen rarely. But because there's so many cards, you will get quite frequently those rare signals, because, for Saruman it happens 6 times. For some other uncommon, it happens 6% of the times. For something else, it happens 6% of the times. And when you add it up, you end up that like half of the wheels you will see some kind of a strong signal, even probably more. You can have a large range for those kind of signals, because if you interpret it carefully and when you think about it and when you memorize what was in your pack that you open, you can sort of put people like, okay, there's probably 2 black drafters here, and maybe there's like green drafter here, and my Saruman wheel, so I'm happy times if I'm drafting blue. Okay, avoid concluding from cards that are rarely picked first or even fourth picked, and avoid, speculating that this color is wide open. So if you have this improvised club and it wheels, it wheels. It happens 25% of the time, which is some signal, but it happens pretty frequently still. So you can't really conclude from seeing that improvised club as your pick 9 that that red is wide open because I got this improvised club. No, because this improvised club will just by chance boost their power level or something, wheel quite probably frequently. DTake01 is asking, what about volume of cards? Like if I see 4 decent cards, pick one, say Alsa 5/7, but maybe a bit better in the same archetype and all 4 wheel, is that a signal? Yes, that is a signal. And we're going to talk about mainly this for the rest of the seminar, so if you bear a couple of seconds, we're going to get there. Just to finish off those theoretical aspects of signal, pick 1, pick 9 is the first pick where absence is also info. So we were talking about Pippin's bravery earlier, and Pippin's bravery will wheel 90% of the time. And this is something that I don't encourage you to overthink, because it really requires a lot of bandwidth to figure out that there was Pippin's bravery in the pack that you opened. But if you have the bandwidth to do it, it's a useful thing to do. Like, check, oh, Pippin's bravery, I opened it, it didn't wheel. That card should wheel. There is definitely someone drafting green. And I bet that it's someone of those two, maybe these 3, people that are directly passing to you, because I don't expect that someone second picked Pippin's bravery, or third picked, or fourth picked, or fifth pick. Sixth pick is even a stretch. So probably it was 7 or 8 pick that someone picked Pippin's bravery. And if that's the case, well, you should know that next pack, those people are going to be passing to you, and they're probably not going to be passing you a lot of good green. So if your plan is to go green, you should definitely mark it somewhere that, okay, probably one of my neighbors is green. And that's what you can get from reading the absence signal of Pippin's bravery not being in the pack. Useful, but as I said, it requires a lot of bandwidth to analyze those signals. I mean, I don't frequently follow that train of thought, but if you really want to be like an excellent drafter, probably that's the level that you need to be aiming at. And practicing it might be useful, because at some stage you're going to be drafting in some big competition, and that will give you an edge by understanding what the person next to you has. So, how to measure signals? Since we finished with those going around the table kind of speculative scenarios, they need to mean something. That's important, that the signal has to mean something, and you need to be able to somehow explain to people what it means. They need to be somewhat standardized, I think, because that was the only way when we can have a discussion about what signals are, if we talk about the same thing. So that's what I'm going to try to do, standardize what signal means. And I will standardize it for the sake of data analysis. Obviously, when you talk about signals, you can divert from my strict thresholds, because my strict thresholds are there so that I can actually analyze it. I wouldn't be able to do it arbitrarily with 3.2 million picks that I analyzed for this analysis. They need to be archetype specific. I think that signals should be archetype specific, because you want to figure out which color combination is open. And to understand which color combination is open, you need to know which cards are specifically signals for that archetype. They need to take card quality into account. So what I mean by that is, if I see a bad card that even our arena players are picking highly to be passed, that doesn't give me very useful information. Let's say the pacifism. Usually the pacifism card in every format goes quite early, because especially beginner players, they love their pacifisms and they pick them. And your arena pod is probably going to have, like 4, maybe 5 players that are at this early stages of figuring out limited. And you will have maybe couple of the players that know what's going on, and they will pick things correctly. Now the problem is, if you're sitting next to a person that drafts 70 lands correctly, let's call it, they will pass you that pacifism, and you can't treat it as a signal, because they know what's going on. They didn't pick the pacifism, they picked maybe errant rider of Gondor, or maybe protector of Gondor, and pass you that pacifism, and you're going to pick this pacifism because you think, okay, white is open, I'm going to pick it to not to leak white signal any further. But in fact, you're sitting next to someone that's drafting white, but they're drafting it correctly. So I would err on the side of assuming that the person that's sitting next to you is drafting correctly, and ignore the white, ignore those signals from bad performing cards that are highly picked. Because if you're sitting to someone who does not draft white correctly, you can still get a good white deck, because they will pick all the wrong cards, and you will pick all the right cards because you know better than them which cards are good. Because you are a 17 lands user and you listen to podcasts about data, and they don't. But if you sit next to someone who's good, then you can read those signals and fall into a trap thinking, that's open because those cards are picked highly, and then in fact they're not open. Right, and you still need to take the arena user preference into account. And what I do is basically calculate the alpha and the probability of the thing appearing in the pick that you're taking, but I will also weigh it for the quality of the card. So basically, I will only look at the signals of those cards that are picked by arena users quite highly, and at the same time have decent, at least, game and hand win rate. So how to measure signals? I mean, I already said, when you open a pack, and this is like an example of a pick one, pack one. You see this Claim of the Firstborn, there's the Dunlet Crabane, Torrent of Golem, there's Samwise, the white one, there's the Glorious Gale. All those cards are in this pack, but of course 0 of them are signals. There's nothing about the signal there, because you open that pack. No one sends you any information. So first of all, like, discredit at all. Yeah, I picked Claim from that pack, thank you. It's like no information to you apart from that you've seen something. I mean, you are basically, the good information from that pack is that you're sending this Torment of Golem for a trip around the table, and if it comes back to you, you're going to be a very happy person. So no signal in the first pick that you open. So how to measure those signals? And I showed you those graphs about how cards disappear in the pack, and some cards disappear quite steeply, like the King of the Oathbreakers, which goes from 100% to 30% to 6% to 3% within the first 4 picks. And some cards are lingering in the pack and staying for longer, like this Pippin's Bravery, which basically was still there at pick 7 and only was at 90% by pick 10. So that card lingers in the deck. So these are the bad cards. They linger as the pick go on. And these are the good cards. They disappear very quickly. And, like already at pick 4, there's going to be like 10% of them or something. And there are the average cards that just disappear sort of equally. Probably they will be more like this, but they won't be first pick very often, but then they drop off at around pick 6, 7, 8. These will be the average ones. Now, obviously, every card can be a signal, but I mean, this card that is bad and is still at 80% after 13 picks, this is going to be more like a card for negative signaling. This average card, I mean, at pick 8, you're still going to see like 50% of it. That's not a strong signal. So maybe it will be a signal at pick, like 13, when there's only 20% chance of seeing it. If you see it then, you say, oh, okay, that might be some sort of a signal. And there's, of course, going to be those good cards that degrade very quickly. And, already at pick 3 and maybe 4, you think, okay, this is a signal when I see it there, because it will only happen like 30, 20% of the time. So again, you might have figured it by now, but how I measured how much of the card disappears is basically I give you the first, 30 commons or so from the set alphabetically, and how many times did I see them in the pack. And you can see that there is some variance in there, but they generally oscillate between 970 and 1050. So there is like a narrow range of how many of those cards you see. So basically, if in the following packs you see them not 1,000 times but 500 times, it means half of them are gone because they were for sure opened in that other seat with the same frequency as the ones that you open as the 17 lens users. So if half of them are gone, it means that half of them were picked, and therefore you can calculate how many of them are gone. So because I have that number, and because I can calculate how many of them are disappearing, I can look at this as sort of like comparisons. So for example, here we have Nazgul and Eomer of the Riddermark, graph inspired by the latest Mystical Dispute, which we're talking about these two specific cards. And as you can see, of course, pack 1, 100% of Nazguls and Eomers that you open are going to be in the pack because no one picked anything out of those packs. And then you go to pack 2 and you already lose half of the Nazguls. There's only 47% of them left in the pack. And you lose around a third of Eomers. You still have like 68.8. I'm not going to say 69. 68.8% of the Eomers are still going to be there. So you can see that Nazgul disappear quicker than the Eomers. Eomers will go much later. Pick 3, 19% of Nazguls. So if you see a Nazgul pick 3, you think, darn, that's late for a Nazgul. That's a signal for me that maybe the first two people are not necessarily interested in black, or there was something really, really busted, more busted than Nazgul, which is hard for me to imagine in the pack. So maybe the first player drafts black, but there was something more busted than Nazgul. Second player definitely was not interested in black because I don't imagine what will be picked over a Nazgul if the rare is missing already. So that's a signal for you, but at least you know your direct neighbor is not super keen on black, potentially also not the person that was 2 seats from you. Strong signal. But when you look at the same with Eomer, it's not going to be as strong a signal because, yes, 66% of the Eomers disappear by that stage, but still 36 of them remain. So that will happen more frequently. But you still are happy to see the Eomer. I mean, the card is clearly busted. And, you can probably assume potentially one of those players is not interested in red for some reason. So a smaller signal. At pick 4, 6% of Nazgul only, so 94% are gone. So if you see a Nazgul, then you're just like, yep, that's a lottery ticket for me. Either people next to me don't know what they're doing, or they're at all not in black. I can imagine that happening. They open some busted. They opened Faramir or something, and they want to play the white-blue because of that. And the other one is forcing green legends, and Nazgul doesn't fit into that particular build or something. But anyway, it's a strong signal that probably at least 3 people downstream from you are not interested in black. Again, it's only one card, but there is a signal in there. And Aylmer drops down to 17%. So Aylmer at pick 4 is a strong signal, as strong a signal as Nazgul pick 3. So there's the moment when you see them. And it still drops off to like very rare situation. You will see 10% of Aylmers at pick 5. So that's, again, is a strong enough signal. Probably 3 people, maybe even 4 people to your side are not interested in drafting red, because if you're interested in drafted red, you're just jam slamming that Aylmer from the pack. Or again, maybe the people that are sitting next to you don't know what they're doing that well, and because of that, they passed you the Aylmer because they don't have evaluation on the card correct. But if they don't have evaluation correct, it's likely that they don't have evaluation correct on other red cards, so you're going to get good cards even though they are passing to you. How do I define a signal? So my approach was to look at the cards that are at least somewhat useful in an archetype, and I was pretty liberal there. I took cards that have a win rate of 55% or more, game in hand win rate, because that means that the card is playable. And I took the win rates for each archetype separately, because I'm not interested that there are good blue cards being passed when I'm drafting blue-red, when those cards are just not good in blue-red. There might be some cards like that. Second of all, I want an occurrence that is at least somewhat surprising. And I arbitrarily picked 40% or less chance of being seen at that stage. So if we go back to the case of Nazgul and Aylmer are not going to be signals at pick 2, because obviously they will fulfill the game in hand win rate criterion. The cards have insane game in hand win rate. But they still are like around 50% and 70% present in pick 2. So they're just not surprising enough at that stage. But when we go to pick 3, both of those cards become a signal. And at pick 4, there will be a signal. And pick 4, all the other picks, they're going to be a signal. The argument I've heard, the people drafting with you don't know what they're doing. Can anything really be called a signal? I think that even if they don't know what they're doing, and I think that this is a bit cruel to the other people. I think that people tend to at least know to the extent that those Nazguls do disappear quickly. People do know enough that claim the precious is disappearing quickly enough. So those cards are still going to be a signal because they still disappear. Yes, people will draft maybe weird cards next to you, but you still want to know if they're in black because they will identify those like most obvious cards quite well, and you want those cards. And you will only get them when people next to you are not drafting this particular color. And you will see later that those signals are meaningful. Spoiler alert. Okay. Occurrence has to be at least somewhat surprising, 40% or less. I had to pick an arbitrary number. I picked 40% because it gave me a higher number of those signals, so I can actually analyze something more granularly. Because if I set the threshold too high, or too low, actually, in this case, like, you know, at 10% of the time something happening, I would have very few signals to analyze, and therefore there wouldn't be any useful conclusions, like because you know they're two weird situations and happen not frequently enough. So, how to measure signals? To measure signal effectiveness, you need to measure the link between the signals that you've seen and what happens later in the draft. So here I have a couple of scenarios. Like, well, I have first explanation. You look at the number of signals in the first X picks, and I will look at different X's there. After 4 picks, after 5 picks, after 20 picks, you can change those things. And then after those picks, you look at what happened in the last X picks. Well, actually last Y picks, whatever. So is there a link between how many signals do you see in the first something picks on what you will see in the last something picks? So here you measure how many signal cards were seen, and here you measure how many signals cards were seen depending on the number of signals seen in the first part of the draft. So you split the draft in half, measure how many signals you have in the first half, measure how many signals you had after that first part. Not half, first part. Alex Canada, 15th pick, many partings. There are only 14 picks in the pack, so I don't know how you get a 15th pick, many partings. Yeah, it is a signal, I'm sure. Yeah, and of course you can divide those things differently. So you can like look at, okay, after half of the draft, how many signals I've seen and how many signals I'll see in the second half of the draft. You may see just at the beginning, is the signal seeing many signals in the beginning of the draft going to tell me something about what happens after that? Or if I measure signals for the first like 80% of the draft, is there any use for that in seeing what's happening in the last stretch draft? And like anything in between will really happen there. So the data set I looked had 3.2 million picks. That's roughly 10,000 drafts. And 345,000 of those, not picks, but cards seen. It should say 3.2 million cards seen. And 345,000 of those cards fulfilled the criterion of the 40%. So they were technically a signal. Not all of those cards were good, so not all of them were actual full signal, but at least around 345,000 of those cards fulfilled this 40% criterion. So I calculated how many signals were seen by each archetype, and that takes into account the power of the card. And then actually the most signalful color in the data set I analyzed was blue-black, with 140,000 signals being seen across those 3.2 million cards. Then there was black-red, 125,000, white-black with 120,000, blue-red, 108,000, black-green, 100,000, white-red, 75,000, blue-white, 55,000, red-green, 45,000, white-green, 40,000, and 8,000 of simic signals. Now, of course, this has something to do with the power of the cards and given color combinations, but also with openness and how frequently those cards, certain cards from those archetypes go really, really late. So blue-green just doesn't have many good cards, and because it doesn't have many good cards, you will not see many signals. And that's why it's very hard to read signals for those weaker archetypes, because there are so few of them that they are probably not meaningful. And there are so few good cards in those archetypes that you have no guarantees that you're going to end up in some kind of a serviceable part of that deck. But if you are drafting those good color combinations, you will see quite a lot of signals. But still, like Boros, which has a similar win rate as Dimir, has 2 times fewer signals appearing across the data set that I analyzed, which means to me that blue-black is a very open color, and you get decent cards quite late in that color, later than they should possibly. Here we come to the, my God, I hate that graph, but it had to be done in some way, and I chose this way. This is a big table, and here we have signal measurements for Dimir decks. Here we have a pick number, so this is the number of the pick I'm interpreting. From 1 to 14, we look at the first first pack. Here are the average signals left in the draft. So in all the draft, on average, there were 13.6 Dimir signals per draft. And of course, there were 0 signals in the first pack, because there are no signals in the first pack because there's no one to send that signal. Here on the column, you see how many signals were seen up till this point. And the percentages in this table tell you what percentage of the average picks that are left you will see in the future if you've seen X signals. So let's give you an example on pick 5, let's say. Pick 5, there are still 13.3 average signals left to be in the draft. But if you saw 0 signals until pick 5 for blue-black, you will get like 98% of those 13.3 signals, probably 13.3 signals. If you see one signal before that, you will see in the future 104% of that number. So 13.5, 13.6. So that's not a big change. Like we've seen this one signal for blue-black, it doesn't give you any kind of an improvement. If you've seen two signals, you got a 10% increase. So it's going to be like 1.3 more. So instead of seeing the average of 13.3, you're going to see 14.7 in the future. So you're going to see like a whole one card more on average because you've seen two blue-black signals before pick 5. And if you've seen three signals for blue-black before that pick 5, including the pick 5, in the future you're going to see 15% more signals of that color combination in the draft than the average. So 15% in here is around 2. So you're going to see 2 whole more signal cards in the future. And the more you move in the draft, the more occurrences of signals you will see. So like at pick 10, you will have some packs where you've seen already 7 signals. And that will increase by 25% what you're going to see in the future. So you've already seen 7 of good signal cards in blue-black. And in the future, you're going to see not 11.5, that is the average for the pick 10, but you're going to see 11.5 plus 25%, and the 25% of that is going to be roughly 3. So you're going to see 14.5. So 7 plus 14.5, 21. This draft will have like on average 21 signal blue-black cards. Average is 13.6. So the more signals you've seen, the more guaranteed blue-black cards you have, but also it will guarantee you seeing more blue, not guaranteeing, it will on average make you see more of those good blue-black cards. And as you can see, I applied very careful color conditioning, and blue bad, red good. So the redder things become, the more good cards you will see also in the future. And you can see quite clearly on this graph that this basically shows you that if you saw more signals, you are going to see more cards. So signals actually do work when you define it as I did. And probably many other definitions of signals will show you the same trend, but that basically means the more signals you see, the more cards of that color you will see in the future on average. And then we can go to pack number 2, and you see the same kind of trend. Like here you will see, like if you saw 0 blue-black signal cards by pick 20, you will only see 70% of what you would expect to see. So not seeing signals also tells you that you probably are less likely to see those good cards in the future. And if you've seen 12 signal cards before pick 20, which happened enough to be in this data set, it's like I cut all the like small numbers from here. So these 12 signals happened frequently enough for me to include in the data, which means probably over 400 times or something like that. Maybe not 400, maybe 100. But you will see 50% more in the future. So instead of this 9, you will see 13 and a half blue-black signals in the future for that draft. And you've seen already 12. So that will make 26 and a half signals. So these are like drafts where the color is really open because the volume of the signals was so high. And again, you will also see cards that are not signals because you will see them in the early packs. You don't account from the fact that probably from your first pick, you will see some good cards in that color combination. So again, this shows really, I think, dramatically that signals and signal reading in terms of reading the volume of the signals, not necessarily by reading individual cards being there, but seeing like, okay, I've seen 5 good blue-black cards so far. and some of them were late because I know my Alsas, and I know that there was like 20% chance of seeing that card, and I've seen it. That means that this color will very likely be more open even later in the draft, so you can accrue those values. And this is just more for fun, but even in the last pack, you will see that increase in seeing cards depending on the signals that you've seen before in the draft. The problem with this is, at pick 34, you are expected to see 4 more signals till the end of the draft, and even if you increase it by 50%, well, that gives you 6. But 6 cards are not enough to build your deck. So yes, you've seen those signals, you read, okay, yeah, blue-black is open, but if you're not at blue-black at this stage of the draft, you can't switch to it. You can maybe very rarely switch for one color at early pack 3, when you open some kind of an atrocious bomb and maybe you had a couple of cards lying around that vaguely fit, and if you read the signals correctly, you can still, get like 7 good cards for that color in the future, but you can't flip completely to a fully 2-color deck in that situation. So I say, by pack 1, you at least probably want to know one of your colors, and then beginning of pack 2, you want to cement what is your second color. And the good news for that is, if you read the signals, there is still going to be enough card if one color is particularly open to even switch in the beginning of the second pack and reap the benefits from identifying which color was open. So yeah, if you have any questions about those graphs, because I know that they're super complicated, but please do ask, because I try to play test them on unsuspected people and ask them what is unclear, but there's always struggles with those kind of complicated graphs. The important part is that you see this gradient of color changing, and the gradient of color changing suggests that signals, if you read them en masse, they will increase how many cards you will see in the future. So at the end of the pack 1, that's how those signals are distributed. I looked at those 10,000 roughly 10,000 drafts, and 300 of them had 0 blue-black signals until the end of pack 1. So 300 out of 10,000, like 3% of the drafts had 0 signals. Around 10% of the drafts had 1 signal in blue-black. Around 15% had 2, and around 18% had 3 signals. So here we cover already something like 20, 30, almost 40% of the drafts have 0 or 3 signals. Now that means that around, is it possible? Does it add up to? Yeah, it adds up to 10,000, I'm pretty sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 50. Oh, so 50% of the drafts have 0 to 3 signals in blue-black in the first pack. But that means that 50% of the drafts have more than 3 signals, and these are the ones where you want to look at it. 10% of the drafts had 6 signals, and from 6 signals you can go end of pack 1, 6 signals, 12% more in the future, 10 signals remaining, so you have 10 plus like 11.3 still good cards coming up on average. So yeah, that's something to look forward to if you identified it well, especially if you started speculating on those cards that are blue-black. But it's not going to happen super frequently that you get 6, 7, 8, 9 signals in the first part, but it will happen just enough for you to be able to make some actionable decisions based on that. At the end of pack 2, like probably half of the drafts will have between 0 and 8 signals. Like almost no drafts will have 0 signal. That you can expect that's going to be the case. But still, like 6% of the drafts had only 4 signals, and these are like very poor in blue black. You probably want to be, especially when you had first pick like a blue card and then a black card, and then things don't start coming. You have to pick those mediocre cards. You probably should get the hint that this is not one of those drafts when you should be blue black. But like a good half of the drafts will have like 10 and above signals. And again, we can come back to the weird color table, and you can see, well, if it had like 13 signals in blue black at the end of pack 3, you'll see 20% more of the future signals. So that means that instead of 5, you will see 6 of them in the last pack on average. So you will still get 6 good cards. You can sort of try to calculate it if you have that bandwidth again. That okay, I will see 6 signals, maybe 2 more other cards that are not signals but are good. So I will get 8 cards for my deck. So if I have 16 cards, I'm probably good for the in that draft in getting unplayables. And this is the last graph of blue-black part, and this is focusing on, for some reason, I don't know why, I just randomly picked one, pack 1, pick 11, and just showing you how does it change based on how many signals you have seen up till this point. So here you have signals seen up until pack 1, pick 11, from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, up to 10. And here are the signals that you are going to see in the future. And instead of giving you the average, I'm showing you the distribution of them. So if you get that pack 11, you see that, oh, it's not 11. It was probably 3rd. No, it was probably 11. I just recalculated. You see that they do exist, and you will see some more future picks when you've seen more previous signals. But of course, this is going to show the average. So if you have 10% more when you saw 5 signals, that means that you see 1 extra card if you saw 5 signals than you would on average. But that doesn't mean that you always see 1 card more. It will be a certain distribution. Sometimes you will actually see fewer cards because you will be unlucky on what was open in the pack. So just to show you that if you had those 5 signals up until the pack 1, pick 11, you will almost never see 0 signals or 1 signal in the future. You will very rarely see maybe 3, 4, 5 signals in the future. That's going to happen like 1, 2, 4% of the time. And then we go to like seeing 8, 9, 10 signals, 11 signals. That will happen like 10% of the time. But then some amount of time, 7% of the time, you will see 12, 13 signals in the future. 5% of the time, you'll see 14, 15 signals in the future. That's a lot of cards that are pretty much playable in your deck. But what is important about this particular visualization is that when you look at the pattern on it, and again, I use the color coding for red as being you see them a lot, and the blue is you see them never. It doesn't go straight down, which means that those averages move as you see more signals before. And because it's diagonal, this again is a visualization of signals working. So the more signals you've seen before, the more of the high signal numbers you will see in the future. And that's, when you compare 0 with 10 signals, you see that those things are really on the opposite side of the scale, when you will see basically never below 7 signals when you've seen 10 signals up until this pick 11. And actually 7 signals is the dominant value for the highest value for when you've seen 0 signals, you will more likely see 6, 7 signals in the future of the draft. While here, you're more likely to see 12, 13 signals in the future in the draft. There's still one more kind of graph. This time is just the bar chart, but it is bloody complicated as well, because why not? But this just shows you the average signals that you will see after this pick. I did for the first 2 packs, depending on whether before that you've seen like low amount of signal, medium amount of signal, or high amount of signal. I didn't go for specifics, I just go for small, medium, and large. But basically you see that independently of whether you saw a large or small amount of signal in the first packs, it doesn't change what happens in the future. So those signals from picks 1, 2, 3, and 4 are pretty much meaningless in terms of predictive power, what's going to happen in the future. So if you've seen few signals for blue-black up until pick 4, you're going to see the same amount of signal cards in the future as if you saw a large amount of signal in those first 4 packs. So first 4 picks, not much meaning. But at pick 5 already, there is a difference of something like 2 picks between the extreme cases in minimum and maximum. And as you move further, you go to like end of pack 1 at pick 14. If you saw very few signals till then, you're going to see 8 future good signal picks. And if you've seen a lot of signal, you're going to see 14 future picks. So that's like a big improvement of what you are going to see based on the reading of the signals. And those things, stay quite high throughout the draft. So if you see a lot of signals, it means basically that both colors that you're picking are wide open. You can pick whatever you want from them. So it's good to keep an eye on those things, because even if you started drafting red-black and you see that red maybe is not flowing, and you see that blue-black is open, and blue-black is more open than any other color according to my data, look for the possibilities to swap into blue-black, because it might be beneficial for you, rather than ending with a mediocre red-black deck. Because even if you do it late in the draft, even if you do it like mid-pack 2, you still have a chance, if it's particularly open, to get like 14 good cards for your archetype, and then you fill your deck with all the black cards that you picked in the first 19 picks, abandoning red even at that late stage. But that would require like an extreme case of being open, those maximum kind of scenarios. So just to show you that those things look very similar, this is the same kind of table that I showed you for blue-black, but for black-red. And you can see that it's the same color scheme. The more signals you've seen, the more signals you're going to see in the future. So the more good cards you're going to see in the future. Same for the pack 2. The more signals you've seen, the more you will see in the future. And then I thought, okay, but these are all like good colors that are very open, that are full of signals. What happens when you do the same for blue-white, which is one of the weaker archetypes? It still has decent amount of signal, but what does it mean then? First of all, if you remember from the first thing, here you had like 13.6 signal. That was your average of what you're going to see in the draft. That's the average. Before you open any packs, you can assume if I play blue-black, I'm going to see 13.6 signals on average in the draft. When you move to blue-white, you see that this goes down to 5.4, which means that all through the draft, on average, you will see 5.4 signals. And you see the same trend. Like the more signals in blue-white you see, the more signals you will see in the future. But the problem is that even with an increase of 40% at pick 10, you got this 40% increase when you saw 4 blue-white signals before your pick 10. But it's 40% extra on 4.5. So that's going to be a whole 1.8 picks more. And it will go up from 4.5 to 6.3 picks until the end of the draft. The numbers that you get for those extreme cases in blue-black were much higher. So here you got 25% increase, but that 25% increase was, like 3 picks or something. And it went from 11 to 14 and a half, and not from 4 to 6. So if you have an archetype that is weaker, those signals become less meaningful, because yes, you will see an increase in the cards that are good in blue-black, blue-white that you're going to see, but it's still not going to be enough. You're very much at the whim of luck of opening really powerful cards in your first picks. So it's very hard to read signals into those less supported archetypes. That's the main problem of reading them with those. So I think that signal reading is at its most useful when you are drafting one of the most powerful archetypes, or when you are considering switching to one of the more powerful archetypes. It becomes much, much weaker as a skill when you are trying to draft one of the underdrafted weak archetypes. There, it's probably better that you have a very solid plan of what you want to do slightly differently, and assume that you can actually utilize those not so good cards to a better use. This is the sort of the 4 kind of strategy, when he picks colors that are not so good and he figures out plans on how to draft them, and then he's not, signals are not that important because he's picking cards that no one else wants. If you pick cards that no one else wants, you are not reading any signals because those cards just wheel all the time, so you don't have that problem. But the trend still is the same. The more signals you've seen before, the more signals you're going to see in the future. And again, here is the numbers game. Like reading signals for blue-white in the first 5 packs even are not important. Then you start getting like a big signal. But big signal for this thing means difference between, I'll see 3 more signal cards till the end of the draft, and I'll see 5 more cards till the end of the draft. Well, at pick 14, when I'm talking about, you are going to still see 28 cards, 28 picks, basically. And seeing 2 more of them that are decent cards is not something that I'm impressed about, especially that the number is clocking at 5.5 on average. Okay. And that's more or less what I can do till now. I'm going to have a follow-up on this episode when I hopefully will skip those monster graphs that are important to know when you want to analyze signals. But what I'm going to do as soon as the game data gets released on 17 lands, I'm going to try to link the intensity of signals to win rates. And I'm going to look, because currently with this data set, I couldn't get what people were playing unless I manually would guess what they were playing by the cards that are there. And I'm not going to assemble 10,000 decks just to make an analysis. So hopefully when the game data is available, I can take those games, I can see what people ended up drafting, apply that data, and see if someone was drafting and blue-black was very open in that pod and they were drafting blue-black, did they have more wins? If someone was drafting, blue-black was open in the pod, but they were stuck drafting white-green because they first picked Aragorn, did it impact their win rate? So basically trying to see if drafting an open color is increasing the win rate, and also if not drafting an open color is decreasing a win rate. So I'm just going to try to apply this on this data set, and that will be like a probably easier to digest data set, but not being able to answer those questions. Do signals work? And here I tried to answer, do signals work in terms of, can reading signals lead to getting more cards on the color? Second question that I will try to answer in the second part is going to be, does reading the signals and getting them right lead to more wins? Something I couldn't have answered this time. But with that, I would like to thank the 17 Lands for getting this data set. I mean, it's a titanic effort to do it, so please do support them. And I would like to thank Fake Jake Brown, who is helping me with editing, and that is a hellish job with my Logoria. Also, I would like to thank to Asescu and Mana Junkie, who are responsible for the music I use in my podcast version of it. And I would like to thank MTGA Zone, and I would really like to thank all the patrons. Hopefully, I can get some more so I can do some gameplay videos. But thanks to everyone that supports me, and I'll see you next week.